understanding the problem is to have a much better chance of solving the problem. And I hear uh, many times people say, first of all, well, we know about the problem, but we want some solutions. Well, the vast majority of people in the world, billions of them, have no clue what the problem is and how the world's being manipulated and to what end. And so just because people have read some stuff or researched some stuff and come to certain conclusions and therefore say, well, I know about that. Well, billions of people don't know about that. So we're not going to stop talking about it because we want more and more people to know about that. And the second thing is, I hear so many times people say, yeah, I know about that. We know what the problem is. Well, the vast majority of people that say they know what the problem is don't know what the problem is. They know some of it. They know aspects of it. They know those parts of it that they've read about or those parts of it they've researched. But they don't know the depth of the problem, and it's in the depth. It's deep, deep, deep in the areas of reality that are beyond what we see. That's not only where the understanding of the problem lies, because that's where it's coming from ultimately, but that's where the solutions lie by understanding the problem and where it's coming from. And I had a bit of an experience this week when I posted a very unpleasant picture of what Israeli bombing in Gaza had done to a child. And I say I posted it, actually I reposted it. It had been posted several times, but certainly been posted when I saw it about half an hour, 40 minutes before. And the reason I reposted it with just a few words was because where do people think these horrific images of the consequences for Palestinian children and civilians from Israeli bombing are actually coming from? I mean, are they coming from London or Sydney or Los Angeles? Where are they coming from? They're coming from Palestine. They're being posted by Palestinians who are desperate to get across to the wider world the scale of evil, the scale of suffering, and the scale of their horrific experience that they're actually going through when these Israeli merciless bombing strikes happen. So what I was doing in reposting it was offering another audience to what the Palestinian people wanted, which is people to see and let register the full horror of what has been going on for this reason. To try to get people to get their asses in gear, to see the full magnitude, or some of it. What's a picture compared with experiencing it? But to get some idea of the magnitude of what has been happening to the Palestinian people, so it might motivate those around the world to look at that horror and say, my God, how can I contribute to stopping this? How can I contribute to this never happening again? Well, that's maturity. What I found interesting is that the reaction to the picture divided people very obviously and blatantly between two camps. There were those coming from the heart, I would suggest, coming from a state of consciousness, whose response was, oh my God, what can I do about this? What can I do to stop this? Because their reaction was not, oh no, you shouldn't be posting that. It was compassion for the victims and the victim of what they were seeing, and for the parents, and for the doctors who deal with this in these Israeli strikes hour by hour. So very large numbers of people reposted that picture with that motivation. Mature people, heart people, who wanted to, as the Palestinians originally who posted it, wanted people in the wider world to see what was truly happening behind the television news reports of more children killed in Palestine, or children hit by shrapnel, and politicians and military men. Oh, well, we tried to reduce collateral damage. Well, that picture was what happens. It's what they really mean when they're saying children have died in Gaza. What they really mean when they say children have been hit by shrapnel, and when these idiots talk about collateral damage. But there was another reaction, which was hostile. And you shouldn't be posting that. I'm upset by that. It's horrible. And what was that doing? That wasn't going, what do I do about this? How do I contribute to this? It was going, me. I've been affected by me. I don't like this. So I am going to shoot the bloody messenger or shout at the messenger because I don't like the message. And you've got people saying, oh, I've followed you for years, but I'm not anymore after you posted this picture. Well, you've not been listening anyway then. You know, we talk about solutions to what's going on. And I will talk at some length in this video cast about it. But one of the bottom lines about solutions is the human race has got to bloody grow up and find some level of maturity and some level of understanding of what we're dealing with. And then we might have a chance. I'll give you an example. I was looking on the internet this week, looking at information about holograms and holographics. And I found this story that was about me. And it was in a British newspaper. And it basically said, that nutter David Icke believes the universe is an hologram. And all that stuff. Well, you see, what they don't know, because they don't choose to find out, is that there are scientific studies around the world that have come to the same conclusion, or at the very least are being pushed into the direction that the universe, and as I say, everything in it, within it, is a hologram, which, as I'll go into in detail today, explains, among many other things that I will be introducing, the world and the mysteries of the world that we see all the time and we cannot understand all the time. But if you're looking for someone or looking for something and you will not go where they are is always going to be a mystery, isn't it? And I've just described so much of mainstream science and mainstream society. So here we are, having someone ridiculed for saying the world's holographic. And here we have an article sent to me this week in Science Daily. Is the universe a hologram? The source of the information is Vienna University of Technology, and it says our own universe could in fact be two-dimensional and only appear three-dimensional, just like a hologram, which is what I've been writing in my books for years and years and years and years. Everybody knows, it says, holograms from credit cards or banknotes, they are two-dimensional, but to us they appear three-dimensional. Our universe could behave quite similarly. Well, ditto. Been in my books for years, but then I'm just a nutter. Why? Because people's perception, particularly the media and the establishment in general, is so programmed in its reflex action responses and perceptions that when someone says something and it's got, he's a scientist, then they believe him, even if they tell him vaccines are safe, for instance. And scientists at one point, who called themselves scientists, said the earth was flat, if you kind of recall. And yet when someone else, who's not a scientist, he's a nutter, says exactly the same and develops upon it, takes it further, then that's not credible. And it's these programmed responses, this programmed belief in where credible information comes from and where non-credible information comes from, that creates this society based on ignorance masquerading as intelligence. So we go to another story that came out this week. One step closer to artificial intelligence, scientists create cells replicating human brain processes. Now, why can they do that? How can they, if you like, technologically replicate the human brain? Because the body, again, as I've been writing for years and years and years, is a biological computer. And so you can replicate it in a, if you like, non-natural sense as a construct, because what you are replicating is a construct, a biological construct. Now, if the universe, our reality, is a hologram, and the body is a biological computer, this takes us to the next question. Well, who created them then? Which then takes us into areas of far greater intelligence, not difficult in most cases, I have to say, in fact, probably in all, greater intelligence in terms of technological ability, not necessarily wisdom, than humans. And so that takes us into, he thinks that aliens run the world. Oh my God. Did I say that ignorance is all pervading to the point where they call it intelligence? Did I mention that? I think I might have done. If I didn't, I should have done. Many, many times. So the story goes on. Australian scientists for the first time developed an electronic long-term memory cell that mimics the work of the human brain. Researchers say the discovery is a step towards creating a bionic brain. Well, this is a biological bionic brain, if you like. It's not us. We are consciousness experiencing this reality through this biological computer. It's that consciousnness that leaves the body at what we call death. And that's why when near-death experiencers have had their experience of dying, the body dying, that they don't. Their consciousness not only continues, it expands into a fantastic level of awareness not experienced within the body. Why? Because the body, the biological computer, operates and concentrates attention within a tiny range of frequencies, and thus that's all we can perceive while in the body. So when our consciousness leaves the body, suddenly these near-death experiences talk about this fantastic expansion of consciousness, awareness, and perception. It's all dead simple, but only if you're prepared to look where the answers are and not go, that's ridiculous, that's ridiculous, that's nonsense, that can't be true. How do you know? What research have you done? Oh, zero, gotcha. The world is mad, completely bonkers. And the other is the network of Western orchestrated and engineered terrorist groups that are causing mayhem in the Middle East and Africa to create the circumstances for a Western takeover, cabal takeover. And those two themes come together in this organization that's, of course, all over the news because of what it's doing now in Iraq, a group called ISIS. And now that's a very significant name, which I'll get to later. ISIS is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, because they want to take over that whole area. And the Islamic State in Iraq and Al-Sham is another version of ISIS. And Al-Sham is actually very appropriate, although perhaps Al-Scam would be much better, because a scam it is. It's another movie, a horror movie, yes, but it's another movie designed to orchestrate events that eventually will allow the subjugation and control of the whole of the Middle East and, in the end, the whole of Africa. Now, this ISIS was supposed to have kind of started about 2004, but it was in April 2013 that it took the present name and started heading towards what it's doing now. And it's said that it is an outgrowth, if you like, from Al-Qaeda. And the propaganda is that it's so extreme, ISIS, that it was too extreme for Al-Qaeda. Now, they are trying to, or have spent all these years, seeking to sell us the lie that this Al-Qaeda organization was behind 9/11. And if you can get more extreme than doing what happened on that day, they didn't, but the propaganda wants us to believe that, then how extreme must this ISIS be, according to this propaganda, that it's too extreme for Al-Qaeda? Load of bloody rubbish. And let's go back to a base position here, in fact, a database position. And that is that there is no Al-Qaeda in the way that it is portrayed by Western propaganda, the way that it is described in terms of its structure. This is Robin Cook, former British Foreign Secretary, very soon before he died, actually. And he said this: throughout the 1980s, Osama bin Laden was armed by the CIA and funded by the Saudis to wage jihad against the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, literally the database, was originally, he said, the computer file of the thousands of mujahideen who were recruited and trained with help from the CIA to defeat the Russians. Inexplicably, Cook says, and with disastrous consequences, it never appears to have occurred to Washington that once Russia was out of the way, bin Laden's organization would turn its attention to the West. Well, it's not inexplicable. It's how the game works. The idea is to create these terror groups, or in many cases, create the belief in these terror groups and how they operate, to justify, under the problem, reaction, solution scenario, create the problem, get the reaction, do something, then offer the solution to the problems you have created. Under the problem, reaction, solution technique, to justify intervention into countries because of terrorism, and justifying more and more freedoms and basic civil rights being taken away in your own country on the excuse of protecting the population from terrorism. And on this Al-Qaeda situation, here's Jason Burke, author of Al-Qaeda Casting a Shadow of Terror. He's talking on a BBC program called The Power of Nightmares. And that is, in many ways, problem, reaction, solution. The power of nightmares. Get people to experience or think they're experiencing a nightmare or potential nightmare, and then save them from the nightmare which you have created. Anyway, Jason Burke says this about Al-Qaeda. The idea, which is critical to the FBI's prosecution, that bin Laden ran a coherent organization with operatives and cells all around the world of which you could be a member is a myth, he said. There is no Al-Qaeda organization. There is no international network with a leader, with cadres who will unquestioningly obey orders, with tentacles that stretch out to sleeper cells in America, in Africa, in Europe. That idea of a coherent, structured terrorist network with an organized capability simply does not exist. But what he was talking about there was Al-Qaeda at that time. This ISIS situation is different. This is a new stage. This would appear to be a very organized network, extremely organized, immensely well funded. I mean, I've seen figures of maybe $2 billion they have at their disposal, and extremely well armed with American weaponry for reasons I'll come to. And here's a big piece in the Daily Mail newspaper this week, Jihadi Terror Group PLC. And the reason they call it PLC is because they've produced accounts, like annual accounts of a company, detailing finances, but also detailing all the murders they've done, the beheadings they've done, and all these horrors that they're carrying out. And it's just like a PLC has produced it. And this is a highly organized operation. And this is, like I say, a new stage. There's no doubt that the Wachowskis know a great deal about what's really happening in the world. And it is portrayed in these movies as fiction. But when I look at my research over the last 25 years, it mirrors much of what appears in their films. For instance, I talk and write at enormous length and detail about the illusory nature of reality, how this so-called physical world is not physical at all in terms of solidity. It's holographic, illusory solidity. And that is the basis of the Wachowskis' Matrix series, that we're living in a fake reality that we're decoding to believe is real when it's not real at all, which is precisely the themes of my books over the years to present day, getting more detailed all the time. And so when I went to see Jupiter Ascending, I was interested to see what the symbolism was, what the themes were in terms of the plot. Now, to be absolutely honest, I mean, I didn't find the film that riveting, really, from a viewing point of view. Maybe it's just me, but, you know, over the last, decades now, it seems, there's been film after film after film after film with the same basic background, the same basic plot, which involves alien takeovers or police state takeovers. And whether it's alien takeovers or police state takeovers, the police state Orwellian society is always a backdrop to these movies. And there is this whole concept of predictive programming. And one of the reasons that we're getting all these movies, one after the other, with the same theme, the same backdrop of the Orwellian fascist dictatorship in whatever form it takes, the reason we're being given that, or one main reason, is to make us familiar with it. Because when you realize that that very society is not only what is desired to be imposed upon humanity, but is actually being built all around us, not even by the day now, by the minute, then you realize that there's more to at least most of these movies than just a bit of entertainment. And what predictive programming does, it makes you familiar with something. Now, overwhelmingly, that will be subconscious. But when a society is coming in that is, to use that word again, alien to what has gone before, and someone of my age, coming up to 63, I well remember what society was like before all this stuff started happening, then there is a resistance through unfamiliarity of this society that's being, not even slowly now, imposed upon us. What's going on? What's going on? But the more you can get people familiar with it, even in a subconscious way, that they somehow, it's not as alien to them as it would be without that, the more likely you are to reduce, to the greatest extent you can, resistance to it. I mean, there are many other ways to stop and dilute resistance to it, but this is one. And so when I watched this Jupiter ascending, I expected the same thing, either alien or police state or both, being imposed upon humanity. But what I got was, I mean, I was sitting in the movie theater just shaking my head and chuckling, really. I mean, the themes of it were out of my books. I'm not saying they were literally out of my books, but the same themes are in my books going back well over 2 decades. And these themes are, for instance, one of the cast on Jupiter ascending is quoted as saying that it's like a cross between The Matrix and Star Wars. And if you read my books, then what I'm saying is, in effect, what we are experiencing and the controlling force behind what we're experiencing is, I could say, a kind of mixture of The Matrix and Star Wars in this sense. The Matrix, in the way that we are, as I've explained at length elsewhere, we are downloading all the time an information source, just like a computer downloads information and puts a visual representation of that on the screen, even though it's not like that at all. You know, I mean, there's not pictures and graphics and words on the information that the computer is decoding. It's computer codes, it's information codes, and the computer decodes that into what we see on the screen. Well, what we're doing with this fake matrix, this fake reality that we think is real, is we're decoding information in basically the same way, and we are manifesting in our visual and other senses, decoded by the brain and indeed the whole genetic system, a reality that we think is real but isn't. And this is why you have this apparent contradiction between the massive, what we call science, studying the world in its so-called and apparent physicality, and at the same time you have quantum physics showing that there is no physicality. Because what mainstream science in almost its totality is doing is studying the illusion, thinking it's real. And what quantum physics is doing is studying the illusion, or at least one level of it. So that's the matrix part of this mix. The Star Wars part of this mix is that there is a non-human force that's behind the creation of this fake reality, that is manipulating our perception of everything, including self and reality and life, so that we unknowingly are slaves and servants to that force. And what I saw in Jupiter Ascending is that very theme that I've been writing about all these years. Well, Big Brother moves on again this week, or more like Big Sister in Britain, in the form of Home Secretary Theresa May, who has announced more anti-terrorism measures. And you'll remember in the wake of 9/11 in North America, Britain and other countries, a great swathe of anti-terrorism legislation came in which the definition of what was meant by terrorism, terrorists, terrorist activity, was so ill-defined and so lacking detail in the definition of what the law was targeting, that those laws could be used across the society in general. And they were, and they have been. We have had some extraordinary examples of the way in Britain that anti-terrorism legislation has been used to keep surveillance on people and be used against people who are absolutely nothing to do with terrorism. I'll give you an example. One local council used anti-terrorism legislation to keep surveillance on a couple to make sure that they did live in the catchment area of the school they'd applied for their child to attend. And this is what has been going on. And so when something comes out and someone makes a speech like Theresa May this week and says, you know, these are new laws against terrorism and terrorist activity, or this new word now, the laws against extremism, define extremism. Exactly. And so the laws that they are bringing in, the new ones announced this week, are designed in just the same way to be applied to the population in general, and very much to people like me and others who are exposing the scams and the conspiracies involving governments and all the rest of the networks of deceit. And I'll get into that as we go along. And, you know, when you look at this whole kind of subject area, what's happening in Ferguson, Missouri with the protests, which of course have gone nationwide in the United States and even manifested in London too. And so it's vital that we see how the dots connect, to see how the scam is unfolding, to take away more and more and more of our basic freedoms for free expression, free speech, free perception, and free opinion. All these are being targeted by anti-terrorism legislation. And this is a newspaper report on Theresa May's stuff this week. Universities will have to ban hate preachers from speaking on campus under a crackdown unveiled yesterday by Theresa May. Once again, we're looking for definitions. What defines a hate preacher? Some of it can be obvious. They're preaching hatred against people and preaching violence against people and war against people. Yeah, you can see that. But unless it's absolutely defined, you can then start to widen that. So governments say, well, this person exposing this politician or exposing this scam and conspiracy within government is preaching hatred against government, hatred against government ministers. And it could very easily be widened to do that, and is. I mean, the examples are there endlessly from previous legislation claiming to be against terrorism. Schools, colleges, prisons and councils will also be ordered to put in place anti-extremism policies. Okay, define extremism. Again, well, you can define it in a small area, although they don't. But then you can widen it. Well, is someone who says 9/11 was an inside job, are they extremists? Well, that's the idea, to move this and use this legislation to bring about a situation where that is precisely the case. So conspiracies and exposing conspiracies, having an opinion about conspiracies, will eventually be considered extremism and thus banned. This is where it's leading, and this is why we need to keep our eyes right on the ball with all this, because it's very clear, and there are past precedents, like I say, that show that this is just the foot in the door. It's not where it's meant to stay. It was such a profound occasion. It's still kind of with me, the energy of that day. And I know from people who've contacted me through various means and put things on social media, said things to people I know, that the audience at Wembley, a very large number of people anyway, went through some really profound transformations during the day. And I can completely understand it because of what I experienced. And it took my mind back to just a few months coming up 25 years ago, March 1990, when I walked into a psychic's house in southern England, a lady called Betty Shine, and was told I was going to go out on a world stage and reveal great secrets and all the things that actually have unfolded since. But in terms of today's subject, what I was told through her, and indeed through other psychics that I met in that period, when I was bumping into psychics all the time, when this kind of change in my life first started. And there was a common theme, there were a number of common themes, but in terms of today's subject, there was this one, that there was an energetic change coming, like a frequency change, like a vibrational change, that was going to awaken humanity from its slumber, from its coma, from its sleep. And people were going to awaken to their true nature, infinite awareness, having an experience. They were going to wake up to what was really happening in the world, as opposed to what they'd been programmed to believe was happening all their lives. And that this energetic change was going to be like an alarm clock, waking people up to see what they hadn't seen before on multiple levels of being, and in multiple ways. And I dubbed this energy the truth vibrations all those years ago. It's why my first book, after I went through my own kind of mind-blowing awakening, was called the truth vibrations. And I use that term because one of the other effects that I was told about then, that this energetic change would bring about, the truth vibration change, was that all that had been hidden would be brought to the surface. And that was not just, like I've just described, people awakening to reality and self and the world, but actually massive secrets that have been kept from us would be brought to the surface. It was almost like the energetic change were going to bring this hidden stuff to the surface. And there's nothing that those who wish to keep the secrets secret could do about it, because this energetic change is beyond anything that they can deal with. And of course, at that time, 1990, there was no evidence for that whatsoever. There was no evidence of any awakening. There was no evidence of any of what I've just said. But as I've gone on through the years, it's become more and more evident that this energetic transformation is real. It was said that the most open would be affected by this change first, and then eventually, even those that at that time were solid, closed to anything beyond the norm and the programmed perceptions of the system, they were going to start being affected as well, in terms of looking anew at self and the world. And that all came back to me massively at Wembley last Saturday, because the energy in that room and the impact that it had upon people, including myself, was just beyond words. It was extraordinary. I had a spare hour a few days ago, and I thought, I'll go on that Twitter and have a go and see what you do. So I went through that morning's headlines on davidicke.com, or some of them anyway, made a few comments and on what was happening in the news and what have you. And then I shut everything down, and I got on with my day, got on with my life. Well, as the comedian Peter Kay said in one of his jokes, you'd have thought I'd have gone in their house on Christmas Day and pissed on their kids. Too many tweets. You've over-tweeted. Beg your pardon? Too many tweets. You mean there are rules on Twitter? I mean, if you think there's too many tweets from someone, well, don't bloody read them then. Go to the next one. There were loads of others being posted at the same time as I was doing my thing. Oh, no, too many tweets. And apparently what you're supposed to do is space them out through the day. Well, I don't want to be on Twitter endless times a day. I had a spare hour. This is what I've got to say. Okay, see you guys, all the best. But no, there are rules. There's got to be rules for everything. You can't have life without rules. Well, actually, you can have life without rules. What you can't have without rules is control. And we are drowning in bloody rules. Anyway, some of the responses were like extraordinary. I mean, the things that humans get their knickers in a bloody twist about. There's all these things going on in the world, all these things that need addressing, all these things that need focusing upon, that need challenging. And yet we get diverted and upset, or even, kind of furious about things that don't fricking matter. This is one response that kind of makes my point. This says, enough is enough. Okay, fair enough. After 20 years, you have lost a fan. 70 tweets already today is far too many tweets. Well, it wasn't 70. Don't be silly. But let's think about that. After 20 years, you've now lost a fan. So, okay, for 20 years then, the person thought I was doing a decent job. Right? Yeah. Okay. And if they've been looking at what I'm doing for 20 years, it means that they must realize that there's some kind of conspiracy going on to enslave humanity on a scale and to an extent that was significantly understated by George Orwell. Right? Yeah. So you think that I've done a decent job for 20 years, and you realize that there is a conspiracy going on that has to be addressed urgently. But you're not supporting me anymore let's have it again because of what? Too many tweets. I mean, that for me is a form of madness. If you look at the definition of madness as the inability for balanced thought, the inability to put things, this is the word, into a perspective, then that's a form of madness. And it's the big penny that needs to drop to understand the world is that the world is mad. And I don't just say that as a throwaway term, a throwaway word. You know, people often think of insanity and states of insanity as people in institutions and asylums. But the big penny is when you realize that human society is an asylum. It's a madhouse. And humanity provides the inmates. We're living in a lunatic asylum called planet Earth and humanity. And if you've got any kind of balanced mind, that's when you stand out, because the people in the asylum think you're crazy, because to them, madness is normal. It's their sanity. And so if you try to work out the world, if you try to understand the world, if you try to make sense of the world by treating it as some kind of sane place, trying to make sense of craziness while still believing the world is in some way sane, then you're never going to get it. You'll be on your deathbed, still trying to work it out, still trying to make sense of the world. And lots of people think, well, it must be me then. It ain't you. No. The world is mad. It's not you. You're the same one. And you start to realize, or you start to see with crystal clarity what is happening in the world and why, when you realize that you're in a lunatic asylum, and therefore insanity is the norm. And the confirmation is that if what you say has validity, then eventually it will be shown to be so. And the trick is to say what you believe to be true, what you know to be true, and not keep it to yourself and stay silent. Because what will people think of me? What will they say about me? And if you're in any way in the public eye, what will them journalists say? Well, my response to that was, don't give a shit. And it still is. Because if we're going to understand what's happening in the world, if we're going to sort out the mess, then we have to know the truth about what we're dealing with. And we're not going to do that by, even if we uncover it, staying quiet because we fear consequences for ourselves. That's how the control system fears and terrifies people into silent acquiescence so it can go on unchallenged. So this week, two things have happened in relation to my work. One, a book I wrote and came out originally in 1998 called The Biggest Secret, named a Prime Minister of Britain called Ted Heath as not just a paedophile, but as a Satanist and a serial child killer. Of course, it was dismissed, and Heath was around at the time. He had the passage read to him almost immediately after it was published, and he did nothing about it. And of course, it was the Ike's mad. This week, it's been announced that a series of police forces in Britain are investigating claims that Ted Heath abused children. Well, he did on an industrial scale, but he killed most of them on an industrial scale. And today I'm going to talk about some of the background that I've been told over the years about Heath. Some of which will lead many people, even now, to say, "That Ike's mad. Have you heard what he said about Ted Heath?" And then this book, The Perception Deception, massive work, and many books before this, going back many years, have said that we live in a fake reality. We live in the very advanced equivalent of a computer simulation. And there is a force controlling that simulation which is seeking to control us. And again, have you seen what that Ike's saying that we live in? Oh, God. And this week, the story in the mainstream media is our universe fake? Physicists claim we could all be the playthings of an advanced civilization. Physicists say there's a possibility that our world is merely a simulation. They claim there may be evidence of this if only we know where to look. For instance, some of the laws of physics may not quite add up, they say. Well, actually, the laws of physics do add up, as perceived by scientists. But they only add up if we live in a simulation, which we do. And all this comes together in basically this. Wisdom is knowing how little we know. And what I call the arrogance of ignorance is the biggest block to human understanding about anything. The arrogance of ignorance is a human disease. Most journalists suffer from it, many to a very serious extent, fatal to their perception. And what it means is you take the norm, whatever it is at any point, as the truth from which you judge everything. Therefore, anything that is outside the official truth must be wrong, mad, or dangerous, and so dismiss it. And when you look through history, the only people that have moved the human race on in terms of expansion of understanding have been those that have challenged the norms. Because if that is not true, it means the norm must know everything at any point, which clearly it bloody doesn't. But the arrogance of ignorance says, like in the journalistic case, I mean, it's swamped with it. I'm going to abuse and ridicule this person because he's saying something different to the norm that I've been told is normal. And when you look through history, and you look at philosophers, people who speak any kind of wisdom, there is a common theme. They use slightly different words, but the theme is the same. Here's 3 examples. Socrates in ancient Greece. To know is to know that you know nothing. That is the meaning of true knowledge. Confucius in China. Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. And another one, he who knows all the answers has not been asked all the questions. Another great Confucius quote. And then finally, Albert Einstein. condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance. And that does for most journalism, for a start, and most people, in my experience. And it's not just the height of ignorance. That's one level of it. But then to abuse those saying something else, that is the arrogance of ignorance. The word occult just means hidden. It's hidden knowledge. But in the sense that it's used most times in everyday life, it's used in the context of the negative use of hidden knowledge. In fact, when you come to the church and organizations like that, they seem to think that all hidden knowledge is bad, is evil. It's not. Knowledge is just knowledge. It's like a microphone. A microphone is not positive, negative, good or bad. It's how you use it. Same with a printing press. Same with hidden knowledge, which has become known as the occult. But the fact does remain that it is clear to people like me who've researched this ongoing for a long time that we are seeing the normalization of the negative use of occult knowledge. We're seeing it with the way that Halloween has become more and more like a mini Christmas, where kids go out with their trick and treat and it's all fun and all that. But the Halloween trick or treat type experience is Satanism light. I mean, that people might find that extreme, but it's not, because at the same time as those kids are trick and treating and going around dressed as witches or ghosts or whatever, in the hidden world, staggering numbers of children and others are being sacrificed by Satanists and crazies, insane people, all over the world in that period we call Halloween. And it's very much like the Eucharist, where in the church, where they drink the blood of Jesus as wine and they eat his flesh as a biscuit or something. It's Satanism light. It's mirroring the real rituals of really drinking blood and really eating flesh that go on in these full-blown satanic networks, which infiltrate, of course, politics, indeed direct politics and the corporate world and banking and all the rest. And then you've got things like the Harry Potter stories and the blatant now satanic occult imagery and symbolism and rituals that you see masquerading as the entertainment industry, be it stage shows or movies or whatever. And so I found it interesting this week, to say the least, to find that the Ouija board is making a comeback. And this is all part of this normalization of the occult. While we do more research on all that, people around the world who these days ask questions about these events and don't just take it like a sponge from the mainstream media, I'm going to concentrate this week on the other major story, the one that since the outrage in Paris has been taken off the front pages, which is where it spent many, many days. And that, of course, is this, the story of Prince Andrew and the allegations made that he had, shall we say, relations with an underage sex slave of a man called Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Epstein is a multi-billionaire who was prosecuted for procuring sex with a minor, and it was part of a much bigger investigation into Epstein's activities, and that is kind of laid out in considerable detail in court documents that have been filed in the United States, based on the fact that the alleged victims of this man were not allowed to have a say or an opinion or an input into the most extraordinary plea bargain in which Epstein, who was facing investigations into activities and behavior that could do you 20 years or more in jail, I think it was something like 13 months that he served as a result of a plea bargain, which allowed him to plead guilty to one certainly lesser charge compared with the other potential charges that he was facing. So this outrage by alleged victims has brought this court situation to the fore as they try to get some justice, as they see it, for the fact that basically they see Epstein got away with it. And of course, when you are a billionaire with high-powered and well-connected legal teams, then you've got a better chance of getting a deal like that than you have if you're a member of the public. And, you know, obviously, it's an ongoing court situation, which Prince Andrew has been brought into as being named in some of the allegations that are made in these court documents. But while the courts and the legal system are poring over this and it's going through its process, many of the themes that come out of this actually are classic themes relating to research that I've been doing for well in excess of 20 years. In the late 90s, something like nearly 20 years ago, so 17, 20 years ago, get the sun out of that, I published this book, The Biggest Secret, which at the time many people thought, as usual, that I was crazy to suggest and name many famous people, both sides of the Atlantic, in relation to paedophilia, Satanism, and horrific violent abuse, in some cases, of children and young people. Ike's mad, that's too far-fetched. Well, what you realize when you research these subjects in any depth and for any length of time is that the definition of far-fetched takes a way big expansion once you realize what the rich and famous are doing behind the facade that we see in the mainstream media and the mainstream world. And one of the themes that comes out of this is networks of child traffickers and networks of this, and the documents talk about how people like one of the girls, now a woman who is making these claims, Virginia Roberts, how they were flown around the world to Britain and other places as part of this network that they talk about. And it's very difficult for people, I understand, to conceive how organized all this is in terms of the paedophile networks and the satanic networks and so on, which interpenetrate politics and banking and all of these things that direct the world that we live in and the society that we live in. But if you imagine the world, the planet, and then you lay over the planet a web, a network of strands in a web. And at that point, you're looking at the world and you're looking at strands and connections all over it. It's obvious. But now, Put countries on top of that web. Put corporations on top of that web. Put cultures. Put belief systems. Put all these different expressions of human society on top of that web. Put the banking system on top of that web with all the apparently different banks competing with each other. And like I say, put the countries on top of that web and all the things that you see in society. And now you look at that and you would see a series of individual situations. You'd see individual countries, you'd see individual banks, individual media operations, in individual corporations of biotech and pharmaceutical and all the rest of them. But even though everything now looks like diverse and there's all these different unconnected things you're looking at, so how can there be any connection and any coordination? I mean, look at it, it's different, there's lots of different things. Underneath all that is that web, is that network. And you start to realize when you do the research, and it takes a long time and it takes a lot of dedication to pour through this stuff year after year. What you find is this bank and that corporation, that government, they're all expressions of the same web. Child trafficking, prostitution, and all the horrors that go with that. And it's everywhere, child abuse. And the Member of Parliament who's been the most vocal in demanding action and exposure of those involved, particularly in the political arena, said this week that the scale of child abuse is basically staggering, and what the heck is going on? Well, I've been on the case for a long time, as readers of my books will know, and the time is coming when to answer these sorts of questions and to answer other mysteries about the way the world is run and what happens, we really do need to move beyond the concrete-minded, programmed, since birth view of the world, reality, and everything. Because questions like, why, as it's becoming clear, I've been writing it for a long time, but it's becoming clear in the public arena now, why is it that worldwide the scale of child abuse is almost unimaginable? Well, that question can be answered, but not by staying within the straitjacket, tiny straitjacket at that, of conventional views of the world. And, you know, we're born into this program, and the program is downloaded to us through parents who've already downloaded the program, through the education system, through the media, through academia and what passes for science, through politics. It's all downloading the program, which is a particular worldview within incredibly narrow lines of limitation. And if you try to explain the world in all its forms and expressions from that perspective, you're never going to do it. You're going to find cul-de-sacs all over the place that you can't go any further, because if this worldview of reality, etc., is true, then what seems to be happening can't be possible. So it can't be explained by that. And science is not something like official history, is not something to reveal. It's actually a structure to suppress and to stop people going into areas of legitimate research because of ridicule or dismissal. Sometimes, in terms of scientists, literal dismissal, if you don't sing from the song sheet. So, questions like why the scale of child abuse, and so many other questions. Why do they do this? Why do they do it like that? Why is that happening? Can be explained. I'm explaining it all in great detail at the Wembley event in October, but it can be explained, but only if minds are prepared to open and perceive possibility beyond the confines of their lifelong, programmed, indoctrinated sense of everything. And it's not even that you need to sit in a darkened room and tune in. Although that ain't a bad thing. You don't even have to be dark. Because evidence that the accepted view of everything is simply not true is there in hard facts, if that's what people perceive everything through. Because if you look at the findings of quantum physics, you see clearly that this solid world is not solid. What it is an information field or information fields, and we are decoding those fields into a reality, just like this computer here decodes the internet from information into what we see on the screen as graphics and pictures and videos and all that. So if we get down to basics in terms of the worldview, you say to most people, is the world solid? Well, yeah, mate, of course it is. Look, but it can't be. So there's suddenly not only a vast new point from which to observe everything and perceive everything, there's also the end of limitation. Because if you perceive the world to be physical, solid in the way that we perceive it and experience it, then so much is not possible. And so when people like me come along and say this is how it's done and that's how it's done and that's what that is and that's how that works, they say, you're mad. You can't do that. You can't do that with a solid world. No, you can't. You can't. But the world ain't solid. It's an information field or fields that we are decoding into a sense of reality. And our perception of reality massively influences, in fact, dictates the reality that we decode and thus experience as what we call our lives, because this is a global agenda of mass and individual mind control, so you find it going on everywhere. But of course there are certain centers where you find it most concentrated, and the United States and Britain and anything to do with Mossad in Israel are some of the major centers, in fact the major centers that you'll find in terms of the manipulation of the individual and collective perception. And that's what it is really. My latest book's called The Perception Deception, because when you look at how you control individuals and most certainly the population in general, you have to manipulate their perception of reality, their perception of self, their perception of world events, and their perception of endless situations. Because from that perception comes their response and comes their behavior. So if you can manipulate their perception to see things in a certain way, then you can manipulate them to support what you want to do as a result of that, or to oppose something you want opposed, or to turn against someone or some group as a result of the manipulation of perception. It is the whole foundation of the global conspiracy and the manipulation of the human race. It's controlling, manipulating, and implanting their sense of reality, their perception. Now, this can be done on a mass scale, and I will talk about that in other places, and it's all in my books. But we've had another multiple killing this week in California, in the Santa Barbara area, involving a young man called Elliot Rodger. And I'm not saying here in a reflex action response that, oh, he was mind controlled to do that because of how you can manipulate public perception of things as a result of it. Because there's a lot more research to do, although there are parts of that story that certainly don't feel right to me, but there's more research to do. What I want to talk about today, and the information I want to share with you today, is about the potential of mind control, the systematic structure of mind control, some of the history of mind control, so that when things like this happen, and I'll be talking about some of the other mass killings as well as we go along, when something like this happens, if you don't have the background of the possibilities of mind control to get people to carry out killings and other acts, basically on your say-so, by in effect turning the assassin or the killer or whatever into little more than a software program. If you don't know that potential, then when an official story comes out saying this has happened, this is who did it, and this is why, there's really no alternative to the official story. So the media and the authorities say, this is the story, this is what's happened, this is why. And people without the background knowledge of the potential for mind control will say, well, that's what must have happened then. But in fact, there are many other possibilities, and my goodness, in the case of so many of these now infamous mass killings in the United States, there are massive probabilities that mind control was involved. I would say blatantly so in many cases. Must be a nightmare to work in now. I mean, if you're a genuine officer with genuine intent and not a psychopath, then it must be a daily nightmare for many people to work in the system as it's become. Because the system is the point, really. The idea they want us to believe is that the police are there to serve the public. They're not. They're not. Individuals within the police might try to do that, the genuine ones I'm talking about. But that's not why the police are there. It's not why law enforcement in all its forms is there. It's not why the military's there. They're there to enforce the will of that which directs and controls the system. And on one side, they are about enforcing that will through laws, that which controls the system has decided what those laws are going to be. And on the other side, to suppress and cover up any revelations that will expose those that which controls the system. And this week we've seen so many examples of both. I've got a newspaper article here, and I mean, you know, my head just shakes all the time over this. For people around the world, we've had this massive political paedophile scandal going on. Investigations galore, it says here, by police, and there's a political inquiries and all that stuff, which is taking so long to get going, not by coincidence. And it kind of concerns the Thatcher administration in the 1980s, although it's still going on today. That's what they don't want us to realise. But the story I'm talking about this week is this one. It's about a bloke called Willie Whitelaw. Willie Whitelaw was Home Secretary in the Thatcher administration and Deputy Prime Minister. And a number of sources, shall we say, over the years have told me that Willie Whitelaw was a paedophile. And so it makes absolute sense, this story, that he is said to have covered up the exposure of paedophile activity and told the police they weren't going to investigate it. Says here, detectives are investigating claims that former Conservative Home Secretary William Whitelaw ordered police to drop an investigation into a VIP paedophile ring. This is the latest one, you see. Here's Willie Whitelaw, Home Secretary, being accused here with evidence that he covered up this paedophile ring to stop it coming out, which involved, famous people, rich and famous people. And when he finished being Home Secretary in the 80s, he was replaced by a guy called Leon Britton as Home Secretary. And Leon Britton is now part of an investigation into why he, or how he, was given a dossier of names of VIP paedophiles by an MP called Geoffrey Dickens, and then that dossier went missing. Do coincidences happen like that? Maybe they do. But here's what the story says. Whitelaw allegedly told a senior Metropolitan Police boss to quash a year-long investigation into a gang accused of abusing 40 children, the youngest of whom was 6. The alleged intervention came in 1980 after a newspaper revealed that the country's chief prosecutor was considering 350 offences against the gang, including allegations that it obtained young boys for politicians, prominent lawyers, and film stars. Goes on, the report was published in a newspaper called the Evening News, a London newspaper, which revealed that the police had passed evidence to the Director of Public Prosecutions, which decides if a prosecution is going to go ahead, and that up to 12 men could face trial for procuring boys and sexual assault. Procuring children for the rich and famous, particularly the political classes in London, is a major industry, and can generate tremendous amounts of money. Ask Jimmy Savile. That's what he was doing, among much else. So anyway, Jeff Edwards, the journalist who wrote the story, claims that just days after it was published, he was summoned by police to an interview and threatened with prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. It's supposed to protect the security, so they claim. It's supposed to protect the security of the country. It's protecting the security of the system, the security of VIP paedophiles. It was the same authority that gave us the most outrageous fairy story in relation to the events of 9/11. And when so many lies and manipulations and fakery has been exposed in all these events before, it would be naivety in the extreme to then expect that when something comes along like Paris, that the authorities are telling you the truth about it. Now, it's too early to start going into great detail about this happened and this is why it was and all that, but you can pick out the themes of events within what happened in Paris and connect it to other events that have actually been revealed with the passage of hindsight, time, and research to have been a pack of lies. I mean, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq is a classic. So it's extremely encouraging to see on social media and in other ways, people in much larger numbers are saying, hold on a minute, we're not just accepting this by reflex action. And that is what is necessary if we're actually going to stop being scammed by these terrorist events into giving more and more of our freedoms away or accepting those freedoms being taken away. Now, people who criticize those who question, my goodness me, has anyone got a mirror? I should have a look if that's what you're doing. They might criticize the conclusions they come to, but asking questions, that's what we should be doing. And those that kind of criticize people for asking questions and not accepting the official version of events, they come out with kind of all-encompassing one-liners like, oh, they say it's all a hoax. Well, some of these things are hoaxes and some of them are not. There are many different ways to set up something, to set up a problem, which you can then offer the solution to and change society in the way that you wouldn't have been able to without creating the problem in the first place to justify the change in law and the way that society is run and controlled. So, problem, reaction, solution, the technique that's also been given the name a false flag, when you create a problem covertly and then offer the solutions to the problems you've created. They're not all hoaxes. There are many different ways that this scenario is played out. And to see more and more people grasping, at least to the point of considering the concept, the possibility that those in the shadows are, through those in the public eye, creating problems on purpose with absolutely the goal of changing society as a result of the problem. To grasp that and start to grasp that, another thing we need to consider and start to understand is the scale of absolute bloody evil that is behind all this. You know, because one of the things is that people judge what others would do by what they would do. And so they say things like, they'd kill all those people on 9/11 just to change society. They'd never do that. No, you wouldn't do that. They do it all the time. And it's this grasping of the scale of evil behind the manipulation of the direction of the world, and this concept of problem, reaction, solution, which that evil uses by doing its evil and then offering a solution to its evil, which leads to more evil. So seeing that more and more grasped, like I say, is really encouraging in terms of where we were not that long ago. And when I started out on this journey 25 years ago, where we basically weren't at all. But like I say, it's not that all these things are hoaxes. There are many different ways that they play problem, reaction, solution, but certainly there are hoaxes, and I mean complete hoaxes. I mean, Sandy Hook, the shootings at the Sandy Hook school was absolutely a hoax. And if you have not come across this, well, just go to my website and put the keyword Sandy Hook in, and you'll get the archive articles, including the work of a man called Wolfgang Halbig. And he is a man who's had a long career in security and safety, including a career looking after the safety and security of schools in the United States. And he started out accepting the official story when it was all breaking in the news, to the point where he actually donated to the fund. But being a professional, being someone who was well aware of how all this works, and what's credible and what's not, and what should happen in reacting to these things, because it's his job, he started to realize that not only were the public being told a pack of lies about the shootings and killings at Sandy Hook, but actually there had been no killings. And that is, if you're hearing this for the first time, absolutely shocking. You're mad, mate. What are you talking about? They'd never do it. They did do that. Look into it. And look into Wolfgang's work and what he said and how he's been treated and threatened since he started going public on the fact that this is a nonsense. First of all, you want to change the world or create a situation. And you know that if you just announce openly, this is what you're going to do, or this is what you want to happen, then you're going to get a big reaction against it. So you don't announce it openly. You play the technique of problem, reaction, solution. Stage one, you create a problem covertly. You blame it on someone else, your target, or you create a situation of upheaval of some kind. You then, through an unquestioning media, mainstream media, you tell the public the version of the problem that you want them to believe. And what you're looking for at stage two is the reaction from the public of fear, of outrage, and basically of either do something, or you get the public into a state where they will accept what you're suggesting in ways that they never would without the initial covertly created problem. So you've created the problem, you've got the reaction, do something, or an acceptance of a suggestion that you of something you want to do as a result of it. And then stage three, you offer the solution to the problems you have covertly created. Now, this has been used to devastating effect so many times over the years, because if it works, why change it? We had a war on terror, still have, with our freedoms being taken away, and war and conflicts galore. And we had the invasion of Afghanistan on the basis of the official story of 9/11 being true, that hijackers, Muslim hijackers, hijacked the planes and flew them into the buildings, etc., as a terrorist act against America. So you had the problem, you had the reaction, understandable outrage and horror, and then you had the solution. And the solution has been the invasion of Afghanistan, the war on terror, taking freedoms away, justified by fighting terrorism, and the whole momentum of war, including Iraq and Syria and Libya and so on, has actually been driven by that initial burst of horror and excuse from 9/11. So if the official story wasn't true, and my goodness me, it wasn't, then all that has been justified since has been on the basis of a lie, a massive, monumental lie. And those with a mind of their own, who have looked at the detailed research into the official story of 9/11, have seen, because it hardly takes a genius to do so, that hardly one strand of that story fits to another. If this is true, that can't be true. If that's true, then that can't be true. The contradictions and the anomalies are stunning. And so this problem, reaction, solution technique has been used over and over again. And what has happened to Malaysian flight MH17 that came down over Ukraine has all the hallmarks of a problem, reaction, solution. Who benefits? Who benefits from what has happened, and who benefits from me and the public believing the official version of what has happened? So if you look at 9/11, who benefited from that? Well, the Muslim world didn't, clearly. Look at it. The American people didn't. Of course, one group and one group alone benefited primarily from 9/11. And that was anyone that wanted to launch a war on terror, i.e. a war of acquisition and slaughter, and anyone that wished to use that as the excuse to demolish civil rights, rights to privacy, and basic human freedoms all around the world. So you look at MH17. Who benefits from us believing the official story that it was taken down on purpose by pro-Russian separatists who are fighting the Ukrainian, actually fascist regime in Kiev? Who benefits from that? And who benefits from the connection and the blame being handed on from the pro-Russian separatists to the Russian government and Putin? Well, anyone that wants to demonize Russia. And as I've been saying in my books and in these videocasts in recent weeks, that is precisely the idea, because there is a long-term plan to have a war between the West and Russia/China, the Third World War. And in that, you cannot divorce what is happening in Ukraine and the downing of MH17 and what is happening horrifically in Gaza as we speak. It is possible to manipulate the brain of individuals and collectively to decode reality in the way you want. Because as Susan Greenfield talks about in this book, there was a time when it was believed that the brain didn't change, that what you had once the brain had developed is how it was always going to be. Now it's known that is anything but the case because of something they called or call brain plasticity, which comes from a Greek word meaning to be molded. And that is what is happening all the time with our daily experience, is the brain is being molded to create networks of chemical electrical communication. And that's changing with our experience. And what this book by Susan Greenfield is really focused upon is how the internet, social media, video games and such like is changing the brains of humanity, especially the young, and why that is I'll come to as we go along. So all the time as we are having experiences, to put it in computer terms, the brain is downloading data. And from that data, it is changing the way that it communicates and how it communicates and what it communicates with. This is a part of the book, where's page 55? Here we go. And it's saying that the internal processing of the brain will determine how you see the world, but whatever external inputs are being fed into your brain at any one time, the experience of that very moment will simultaneously change that organization of brain cells and hence your thinking. One leading expert in brain development, Brian Kolb, sums up, anything that changes your brain changes who you will be. No one can be in any doubt, surely, that internet and social media and video games are changing the brain because of the different information, the different way of working that's brought into human society. He goes on, your brain is not just produced by your genes, it is sculpted by a lifetime of experiences. Experience alters brain activity, which changes gene expression. Any behavioral changes you see reflect alterations in the brain. The opposite is also true. Behavior can change the brain. And so one of the lines that Susan Greenfield uses a lot is use it or lose it. Because the way the brain works, if you stop using part of it, or the networks that at that point have come together, the communication networks, then they fade and they disappear. So you can learn something and carry out that practice, whatever you've learned, and then you stop, and that connection, that network that came together because of what you learned and what you were doing, then starts to unravel. And there's another thing about the brain which she talks about in the book, and that is that it doesn't do vacant space. If it's there, it will be used in some way. And there's a fascinating point she makes, that when people in older days, older life, get cataracts, well, when the cataract's removed, most of the time, it seems, the sight returns. But with children, when they get cataracts, in other words, the part of the brain relating to sight is not being used because of the effect of the cataract, then often children who then have cataracts removed have impaired vision for the rest of their life. And the way she explains it is the brain still changes as we get older, but it changes slower. Older people's brains are much less apt to responding and changing. And we use phrases like, they're set in their ways. But the brain does still change, but slowly. Whereas in children and young people, this is very relevant for the social media stuff that we're talking about and the book talks about, it changes fast. And so what's happening with the cataract example is in children, when that part of the brain relating to sight is not used, it uses it for something else. It turns it into another function. Whereas older people, their brains change much slower in that way. And thus, when the cataracts are removed, that brain, part of the brain that's been dormant because of it, it's still there as a sight function, because that rapid change that you get in children has not happened. And when you look at the way young